just for me. So what we're gonna go through these. Try to use these 10 things to go through, so that we have like a better understanding of this amud. So just a quick summary of Beis amud Aleph, because it's connected, obviously. The Mishnah says that a sukkah that's higher than 20 amos is pasul, and Rebbe Yehuda says it's kosher. Question is why? Why do the rabbis say it's pasul? And there's 3 reasons that are brought. Rava says because the pasuk says Laman Yedu Dorosechem, in order that the future generations will know that I caused the children of Israel to sit in sukkahs. And he reads it hyper literally that you have to know you're sitting in a sukkah by, can't be too high, because if it's too high, you won't see that you're sitting in the sukkah, because you won't see the schach, because the schach is the main thing of the sukkah. Anything higher than 20 amos, he says, is pasul. That's right. That's Rava. Reb Zera says there's a verse that says "B'sukkah tiyah l'tzel yomam." It's not in Chumash. It's in Navi. The sukkah will be shade. So therefore, he says you need to have the shade of the schach. If it's higher than 20 amos, you're sitting in the shade of the walls. That's his explanation. They're each challenged in the Gemara. And then the third explanation is Rava. Rava says that the Torah is telling you, go out of your house for 7 days. And therefore, if you're going to build a big structure, there's nothing arid, there's nothing impermanent about it. It's too permanent. And therefore, it is not a kosher sukkah. Now, that's last week. Okay? That's amud Aleph. So amud Beis, we're basically going to explore the following thing. The first 3 things are, why do the other rabbis reject Rava, Reb Zera, and Rava? What was their issue with it? So that's what we're going to be doing. That's number 1, is why we say Kula Karaba Lo Amri. I got to take a look at the Gemara. Old fashioned, I got the Shas in the home. We need a old fashioned with the Rif and the Ram and the Rosh. All these art schools are wonderful if you only want to know what it says, but if you want to go into the back, you need one of these. So let's take a look at this and go a little deeper here. So the Gemara says on top, Amri Hahu Yedia L'Dorasi. Rashi says, who's everyone? Right? The first time I learned this, it's like everyone doesn't hold of anyone. Right? But it's they don't hold of anyone except for themselves. In other words, Reb Zera and Rava don't hold like Rava. But Rava holds like Rava. And the same thing for Reb Zera, and the same thing with Rava. They each only hold of their own answer. The reason why they don't hold of the other answers are enumerated. They don't hold like Rava because they say it's the idea that knowing is that the future should know. It's not about the height of the wall. Now, Rashi says something very interesting. Rashi says, it's not talking about knowing that you're sitting in a sukkah. It's talking about the knowledge of the future generations of Hekif, Sukkos, Anane Kavod. Again, this is Rashi L'Shitoso that holds that the pashtus of the pasuk is not going on Sukkos Mamish, not on literal Sukkos, but it's going on the miracle of Anane Kavod. It's just talking about that the future generations need to remember that we had a miracle in the 40 years of the desert that Hashem protected us with Anane Kavod. Anasala Avos. And this is a side question, is why the word Yedu versus Zechira. Usually we have Laban Tiskar. Right? You have remembering Yetzias Mitzrayim and many other things. So it's a different, similar yet different. So now here's what we're going to take a look at. Gemara in Eruvin. And Gemara in Eruvin says, that a lechi and a Korah, when you have a Mavui, you have a area that's closed in from three sides, but it has a big wide opening. And you want to make it look like you don't want it to be confused with a public domain. So you put a beam, what we would call an Eruv, on the open side. And the mission is there. The first mission, Eruvin, says if it's higher than, same thing, higher than 20 amos, it's not kosher. It actually doesn't say the word not kosher, it says lower it. And that's the Gemara talks about both in Eruvin and in Sukkah. Why? By Sukkah it says pasul, and by Eruvin it says lower it. That was last week's shiur. I'll give you the recording word there. Why in Eruvin, by the Korah, by the beam, can't it be above 20 amos, according to the rabbis? Anybody know? So there's two opinions. One opinion is Rav. And Rav says it's learned out from Sukkah. And it has to do with the height of the ulam and the heichal. It has to do with which do we compare a archway? What do we look at? And based on whether you look at it like one part of the Beis Hamikdash or the other part, then it could either be 20 amos or maybe higher, 40 amos according to Rabbi Yehuda. That's what Rav says. And one of the rabbis, Nachman bar Yitzchak, says, no. You misunderstood. Rav, with all due respect, you're misunderstanding the Mishnah in Eruvin. The reason why you're misunderstanding the Mishnah is because it's mentioned, I think, in a Brisa, that like the Ulam, it compares it to one of the entrance ways of the Beis Hamikdash. So you're saying it's because of that it has to have that same shiur. It can't be any higher. He says, no, that's just like a memory device. It's just interesting to know. It's like if a rabbi says something in a talk and you ask him, did you mean one is because the other? Say, no, I just wanted to tell you these two things are similar. They have nothing to do with one another, but they happen to have the same height. So it's not the Mishkan. The Gemara, that's the whole sugya in Eruvin. How do we learn out the Mishkan and the Mikdash? We don't have to get into all the things, but it was 20. In the Beis Hamikdash, one of the archways was 20 amos, another was 40 amos. It's just a question of which one we learn it out from. According to Rav, comes Rabbi Bar Chama and says, you're making a mistake. It mentioned it not because there's a limud one from the other, but it just happens to be the same amount of thing. What's the reason? It's nothing mystical. It's not about that when you're making an Eruv, you have to think about the Beis Hamikdash. It's no connection. And the same, the same thing for sure by Sukkot. But what it is if it's higher than 20 amos, the whole reason why you have that Eruv there, that Korah, that little beam, is to see it, so that you don't think it's a public domain. If it's too high, you won't notice it, and therefore the whole purpose of it is undone. That's the opinion of Nachman bar Yitzchak. The Gemara in Eruvin asks a question. Question is, if that's the case, the underlying premise of Gemara Sukkah, according to Rava says the reason why you can't have a sukkah that's higher than 20 amos is that you don't have a yediyah, you don't have a knowledge that you're actually sitting in a sukkah when the schach is too high, which means the underlying premise behind why you can't have the crossbeam too high and the schach of the sukkah being too high is the same thing. You don't see it. You need to see it.
wanted the sale to be coming from the schach.
Yeah, but that's not. That's number two. We're on number one. Yeah, that's number two. We'll get to that. It's number two. It's a little. Yeah, it's in it's in the Gemara. You remember the Gemara, and also probably. It's okay to remember Gemara. You don't have to apologize for it. So the Gemara says it's the same underlying premise. So why, according to Rava, why would you have to state the Mishnah and Erevin and the Mishnah and Sukkah? It's saying the same thing. It's saying when there's something you need to see, it can't be higher than 20 amos. Say it one time and you'll know it for the other time. The Gemara says a very simplistic answer almost, that I would think if you only said it by the Erev, I would say, okay, because an Erev, you're walking, you only see certain things. This is for you, because you're an architect. You see the world in a certain way when you're walking in it. But a sukkah that's yeshiva is for sitting in. I think Rashi says that you even sleep in it. So you're going to be lying down. You're going to see it. Doesn't matter how high the ceiling is. You're going to see it. So I would think that you wouldn't extrapolate one from the other, Kamash Malon. It lets us know that I would, and the other way as well. I would say maybe that Rabbi Yehuda would be Mako in if I said the machlokas only by sukkah, I'd say maybe Rabbi Yehuda wouldn't, that they're not identical because of the physical formats of them are different. That's the Gemara in Arabic. So. But if you take a look at our Gemara, it's a very obvious question. Gemara says a little bit further. I'm going to skip ahead and then go backwards. The fifth line, second word from that line. Kaman azal hadam Rabbi Yoshia Amar Rav, machlokas b'she'ein defanas b'gius l'schach. Which of the three opinions that we just said does Rabbi Yoshia, quoting Rav, who says that the debate in our Mishnah between Rabbi Yehuda and the rabbis is only when the walls of the sukkah don't reach all the way to the schach. But if the walls do reach the schach, then even if the sukkah is higher than 20 amos, it's kosher. The Gemara says, come on, you want to know like who? Rava. It fits in with Rava, because his opinion is because the eyes don't see it. But in this instance, keeping the falas megiyos l'schach, when it does reach the schach, mishul sholta be'ena. Again, it's just the question of how the eye sees something. If the eye has something to run up on, then it sees it, then it's kosher. So here's the question. Want to know the difference? Why if we have our Mishnah, another answer the Gemara could have said in Erevin is they're different things. There's a wall, in Erevin, and you still don't see the Korah if it's higher than 20 amos. But by Sukkah, if there's a wall, you do see the schach. So maybe that could have been maybe really the question. This is such a good question, even of why do we have to say the same thing, sukkah as neighbor? It's not the same thing. They have both different dinim. They have two different dinim. So if you look in Tosfos, they're very different. Yeah. So, but look at the second Tosfos. Mekiven did fanos megios l'schach mishul sholta be'ena. So Tosfos says below dami l'ner Chanukah, b'koras Mavui. The sukkah is not like Chanukah licht or the Korah of the Mavui that we've been talking about. We'll get to Chanukah later. The lo choshev heker l'maylam be'esim. there in those two cases, it's not considered recognizable or easily discernible when it's higher than 20 amos. Even though, like I just said, the Korah, the crossbeam, is on the wall. So can't people look up the post of the wall to see the crossbeam on top? Why not? The Hasam Korah Tefach there, of course, very thin. We use a literal fish line. Okay, then they had a little something. It was a tefach, but even a tefach is one handbreadth. It's very small. You're not going to notice it. Lo shol ba'ena. Kemo b'sukkah, as opposed to sukkah, they're chava too, but it's bigger. It's really bigger than one tefach. The walls, the sukkah. It's an interesting answer. These distinctions. But what they do, the answer to your question, Rafael, is that they have something in common. The architectural design may differ, but it's all about recognition, ability to see the thing. Do you see the schach, according to Rava? Do you see the Korah in the case of Reb Nachman bar Yitzchak in Erevin? But the way you see is different. In other words, the bottom line is when you ask somebody, do you see this? It depends on what you're looking at, who's looking and what you're looking at and how you're looking for something. So the Tosfos is pointing out these chilukim. Now, it could be that it could have been that the Gemara could have answered. Tosfos likes to say sometimes, he doesn't say it here, or in Erevin. When the Gemara asks a question and gives an answer, Tosfos often will say it could have answered something else. There's no raya that answer could not have been used. It just doesn't need to. When the Gemara answers a question, it doesn't have to give a second and third and fourth answer, because one answer suffices. Sometimes it gives two answers. It doesn't have to. So it could be that we could learn that really the Gemara there could have answered another answer. It's not just about whether you're the yeshiva versus the hiluch, the sukkah and erev, the two different. You're talking about. It's not so much what they're for. They are for two different things, but it's also how we use them that are different. The interface is different. But it could have also answered this answer, which says, and because of that, there are these different chilukei dinim. They're not the same, and therefore you need two mishnayos. Why didn't it answer that? Because it already had another answer. Didn't need to answer that. Okay. Now, we mentioned earlier, which is why does our Gemara not mention anything about the Heichel and the Ulam? Why is it only a discussion and a machlokes of that, if that's the theory behind the Mishnah Erevin there and not in the Mishnah Sukkah? And the simple answer is that the whole reason that Rav was learning in Erevin, that it was connected to the size of the Ulam versus the Heichel, is because that was a brisa that mentioned it. Here there's no such mention of anything. And he didn't want to carry over one from the other. In other words, there's for whatever reason, they bring up an equation between the two, so Rav wants to say it's because they're connected. Here nothing is mentioned, so it leaves it open for Rava, Reb Zera, and Rava to each come up with another explanation that's not already listed by Rav in Erevin. Okay, that's number one. Number two, I know it's a little bit complicated. You go back later and you'll learn this again on your own. Ask me any question. I'll be here Shabbos here tomorrow after the mini rally. Okay, the second thing is nobody holds like Reb Zera either because it's Liyamos Moshiach. Let's look at the Gemara here. Second line, back to the second line of the Gemara. Second word, the second line. Reb Zera nami lo amri ahu Liyamos Moshiach u'dechsiv. The other Amoraim, meaning Rava and Rava, don't hold like Reb Zera because look at Rashi, third line, Liyamos Moshiach. Rashi says, Osam sukkahs yulitzel, la'oneg, la'mistar, those sukkahs that the pasuk is talking about in And Yeshaya, fourth chapter of Yeshaya, that's talking about Yemos Mashiach. Mashiach will come. What? L'oneg. Oneg means to have oneg, like oneg Shabbos. The mistar is to protect you from the elements, like the bad inclement. What's it called? The inclemental weather. Avosukos mitzvah enolitzel. Now those 4 lines, 5 lines are very problematic. But the sukkah that we have to have a requirement to be in a sukkah for 7 days, that's not for the shade. Pnei Yehoshua asked a bomb question. The definition of making a sukkah versus it not being a sukkah is that it's for shade. So, for example, there's a concept we're going to learn more later about tasav lamana asoy, which means you can't be chotech begadish, which means, let's say you have a bunch of material, schach material, a big pile of it, and you go in and you make room by pushing it aside, pushing it up, pushing it down. That's tasav lamana asoy. You didn't make a sukkah because it was already there. You just made a little cave to be in, surrounded by the foliage. Wait a second. If it's not for the sale, who cares? I mean, there's no such thing then as tasav lamana asoy, because it's not for the shade. The definition of the machlokas beisham beisil of do you need to make a sukkah for the sake of a sukkah is. It's a good question. Exactly. Does it mean you have to literally make it for the sukkah, or you could for that holiday, or you could just make it? But if you're making it for a purpose, and ostensibly that purpose is it provides shade. So I believe the Pnei Yehoshua answers, yeah, I'm pretty sure this is Pnei Yeshua's answer. I have it here. He gives over a lot of brisker tires, a lot of the Rav's shiurim. I don't know if he learned the Pnei Yehoshua regularly, but the Pnei Yehoshua already said over some of the Rabbi Soloveitchik's Torahs. He doesn't quote the Pnei Yehoshua on them, so he might not have seen them. He says, you need to be shaded in a sukkah, but it doesn't matter whether the shade's coming from the wall or from the schach. And he says, the Pnei Yehoshua, yeah. And that works out very well because he answers that question why the Gemara is not contradicting itself later with this Rashi. And then he explains back on the Rashi on the Mishnah that says Bal Shem Aschach Kriya Sukkah. This is not the sale. It's not Al Shem Atzel. It's not because of the shade that it's called the sukkah. It's about the schach. Which means if it was about the shade, then you would need shade of only the schach, and you don't need shade of only the schach. You need schach. The name schach is something that provides shade, but it's not essential that it has to be the thing that you're sitting in its shade. So it could both be true. To block, yeah. So it could be blocking something without necessarily being that you're sitting in its shade, so to speak. It's a subtle difference. And we'll get to it later. Let's go to, so that's number 2. And then the second part of number 2, this is more for Rafael, will appreciate it. We'll get to the Chassidus and Kabbalah part of it. The Gemara says in number 2, what about the pasuk? Is Limos Moshiach. So Reb Zera wants to explain that if that pasuk in Yeshaya was really talking about the only Yemos Mashiach, it could have said v'chupa tiyel etzel yamim. And then when the days of Mashiach will come, will be in a canopy. Why does it specifically use the word sukkah? We'll have both things. The future will have a sukkah, and right now we need a sukkah that provides shade through the schach. the bottom line is the other rabbis don't learn like this. Reb Nachman, the Mei HaShiloach say, look, bottom line is all of these three shittas, they're each teaching us something. So what are they teaching us? So let's look at Rava versus Reb Zera. Rava says that the Yedi, Laman Yedu, in order that you should know. So over 20 amos represents something that, so Rav Nachman is a munah that's too distant. People who have faith, but they have a munah, like they walk into like the darkness, don't bring a flashlight in the middle of the country, and there's like mountains. It's munah, they walk off a cliff, chas v'shalom, like emunah, like there's too much space between their emunah and their actions. And it's not allowing for them to do, or even worse. I think it's Gemara. It says gan va'afum rachmana karte, that a thief can also daven tasha, has emunah enough to daven tasha to be successful. So either their emunah doesn't let them take the right action, or their emunah doesn't help them from making the wrong action. So in other words, the emunah is not going into them. It's not shy. It doesn't have anything to do with them. It's like this emunah is out there. Yeah, the or and the block. Yeah. Okay, so that's Rava, and that's Rava. That the Ishbitzer would say something along the lines of, you have to see HaKadosh Baruch Hu in your life, and if and the things that are happening to you, if Hashem is too distant, and you just think they're happening because of the mikra, they're just happening because that's how it happens. The economy, your boss, whatever, the dating market, that's just what it is. So then you believe in all of those things around you, because the schach, in his conception, represents the idea of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The idea of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is too far away from me. Maybe Yom Kippur I think about God a little bit. The rest of the year I don't. So no, the sukkah's got to be, can't be too high. That's Rav Nachman. That's the Ishbitzer. That's according to Rava. Rav Nachman of Breslov and the Ishbitzer according to Rava. Comes from Zera and says it's got to be sale sukkah. It's got to be the shade of the sukkah. What does that mean? So he says that sale, similar to what you were saying about sale, represents the recognition that the thing I'm getting, although there's a hefsek, there's an interruption between me and God, God is right above it and using this kind of intermediary for me to receive it from, but it's not coming from the intermediary. So, for example, when I'm sitting in the sukkah, I see a little sun, see a little shade. I know the sun is out there. When I'm sitting in my house, I don't know the sun is out there. I'm sitting in my house. So, sitting in my house, I think I think whatever I have, I made it. When I sit in the sukkah, I know that there's shluchim, but I know very clearly nobody's thinking that, oh wow, this is a solid roof here. I'm good on my own. No, you recognize I have a little Hashem as shluchim, but they're just that. But if it's too high, then I'm not recognizing that hakara in that. So that's number two. That's observed. And even further, what's the difference between the sukkah of the Chai versus the sukkah of Yemos Mashiach? And the answer is what's the difference between the sukkah of now and a house? This is beautiful. This is Ishbitzer. This is why you have to become an Ishbitzer immediately. go and convert to Ishbitz. I'm just kidding. That of what?
You found it in this Irish.
Yeah. Oh, he has on Gemara. He has a little bit on Gemara. Some of this is in his Mei HaShiloach, actually. It's in the same volume as the Chumash. Yeah. So here's what the Ishbitzer says. This is a great part. He says the problem with being at home is your environment is completely controlled. You're not aware of the world. It's like whenever your heating is on, it could be snowing outside, but it's 80 degrees, and you're dry. That represents the world you've created for yourself. And you think you're the creator of your own reality. What's the problem with being outside? You don't have any control. So it's the opposite. You're at the whim of everything around you. So it's almost like you don't want to be like under God in an unhealthy way. Like, let me see what it's like not to have a home. I'll be outside and let God provide. Nobody wants to really do that because it's called being homeless. You don't want to trust in God on that level that God will provide. I'll sleep under a bench. No, you don't want to do that either. It's because it's too unregulated. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu says you could be in a home. That's okay. But not all the time. Sukkahs for 7 days. If you come out of the sukkah of your home, there's a wall, there's a schach, not exactly a ceiling. So you're very well aware. So you're aware that you're not in your control. So it's that's exactly what a sukkah is now. What's going to be the chiddush of Yemos HaMashiach? The Yemos HaMashiach, even the thicker klipa, so to speak, of home ownership, balabatishkeit, like the control. That's why that sukkah will stop not just the sun coming in, but also the rain. It's going to be a thicker klipa, and yet it's going to still be a sukkah. It will still have the same hakara that we need to be in a sukkah. We need to be vulnerable. Like I hate to say it. The wake-up call happening on Shmini Atzeres is because our vulnerability is on sukkahs. That we're not invincible. It's beyond our control. In other words, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is saying, you can't be the one that thinks you are everything. I'm not explaining why what happened. I don't know why what happened. But the idea that the sukkah represents something that's not completely in our control, so we have emunah in Hashem, that only has to be now. Because now, nature is, if you knew how to be completely good in your health and your economic well-being, you start forgetting. Shamanta, you forget things. So Yemos HaMashiach, the Kiddush is going to be, you could be able to do both. So that's one thing. So there's more on that, but let's go to that's number 2. Let's go to number 3. Soon we're going to move very quickly because it's late. Gemara goes further. Number 3 is Reb Zera lo Amro. The Rava, we don't say Mishum Kushir Abaya. So the Gemara says, what does Rava say? Rava says that it can't be a kavua, it can't be too permanent. That's the reason for the rabbis. But the Abai asks a question: what if you make a smaller sukkah that's not above 20 amas, but you make it out of iron? Would that also not be kosher? And Rava answers, that you could make it temporary, but if you have to make it over 20 amas, or do make it over 20 amas, it's by nature not going to be really temporary. So, what is the halacha, by the way? It's a nafkamina halacha, right? Because if you hold like this shita Rava, it can never be over 20 amas, period. Doesn't matter how big it is, doesn't matter how high the walls. But according to Rava, if the walls go up to the schach, it could be higher than 20 amos. According to Reb Zera, we'll learn later, that if it's more than 4 by 4 amos, it could also be higher than 20 amos. So which one's the halacha? Does anybody know? It's like a good.
You see big sukkah, so good. Why not?
Which reason? Rava, or Rab Sarah, Rava. I don't know this. You're right. Regardless if it's correct. How did you know this? You're guessing, you looked it up in the Rif for the Rambam, for the Shulchan Aruch. You knew before. You guessed correctly, but it is a matter of debate. And I'm going to show you how it's very interesting if you look at the Rif, the Rambam, and the Shulchan Aruch, how each one of them says language. So important. So beautiful. Okay, here's the Rif. The Rif is the Rebbe of the Rebbe of the Rambam's father. The Rif's student was the Rimigash. The Rambam's father was a student of the Rimigash. The Rambam considered his Rebbe who? The Rimigash, really the Rif. So you could count on your fingers and toes, maybe a little more, all the times that the Rambam doesn't agree with the Rif. All the rest of the time, the other thousands of times, he agrees with them. A lot of people say, wow, the Rambam, how did he know all of this? That's in the Rif. Yeah, I mean, it's not so simple. I don't want to make what he did was, I'm not trying to belittle the Rambam. I'm just saying he had a teacher. He had the Rif. He Paskin like the Rif most of the time. So what does the Rif say? The Rif says the following. And I want to show you this Tachas Lashon of the Rambam. The Rif says, first he says, says there are others that say the halacha is like Rava. The Hakol Mili Kirav Avid. And now this is very controversial, what he even means. So I'm not going to explain it, but the Ran explains it beautifully. The Ran, Rabbeinu Nissen, is a commentary on the Rif. And he explains that when I read it without the Ran, I was like, what is he talking about? I looked it up. It's when there's a machlokus between Rav and Shmuel, Rava would Paskin like Rav. But there's no context here because first of all, there's no Rav and Shmuel. There's Rav according to three different opinions of what Rav said, and there's no Shmuel, and that's also only halacha and mamanis. So it didn't make any sense. Comes Rabbeinu Nissen and says, no. Why did Rav say that? Rav had a special closeness. Rava was the Talmud of Rav. He knew what Rav said. So if there's three people, each quoting Rav, trust Rava more than the others. So that's how to learn this statement that doesn't really make sense here. That's how the Ran says to learn this statement. But anyway, he says, and we, I don't know who the we is, the euphemistic, us. It's like he must have been giving a shiur. And he told the other people in the shiur, we don't paskin like that. We paskin like Rava. The Carmel and Sukkah diras arai bina. That it needs to be, has a temporary element to it. And then he explains it. Yehuda the Malchus really the Sukkah diras kava beinan. The reason why Rabbi Yehuda argues in our Mishnah is because he thinks it should be kavua. We don't hold like it. And he says, if the walls reach the schach, for sure it's a diras kava and not good. But if you look at a Mishnah coming up soon, that sukkah agabe sukkah, we also go paskin like the way Rava explains the machlokus there between Rabbi Yehuda and the Chacham and its elishitatzam. It flows. That if you don't know how to interpret a certain Mishnah, you look at another Mishnah, and there's one of the interpretations goes with that other Mishnah. So then let's learn them together. So we learn them in tandem. That Rabbi Yehuda over there is talking about, he believes that sukkah has a vias in it, should be somewhat permanent, and the Chacham hold it should not be, and therefore the halacha is like Rava. How does the Rambam paskin? Beautiful sentence, period. He says, this is how he passes. One period says everything we just learned. Well, not everything. He says a sukkah cannot be higher than 20 amos, period. Nothing else. Doesn't qualify if there's any exceptions to that. And therefore, what does that mean? There's no way it could be kosher if it's higher than 20 amos. He paskins also like Rava. Does he say I paskin like Rava? No. Does he say even if the walls come to the schach, it isn't kosher? No. He just says higher than 20 amos is puzzle, period. Like the Mishnah. But once you have the Gemara and you just say that, it's clear that what he meant is with the halachas like Rava, that it's about, it can't be too kavua, can't be too permanent. Yes, it's only the height. It's only the height. No, because now you're asking a very practical question, because that must be the shiur that the architectural rabbis of that time figured out is kavua. They know that. Kabbalistic, it's Ketzer, something like that.
You don't want it to go higher than above Zerah. And you're reaching.
Whatever Bechina it is. Yeah. Okay, 10 and 10. Yeah, there's two. You count the spheres twice for whatever the reason is. So that is the Rambam. Then the Shulchan Aruch says beferish that the halacha is like Rava. He doesn't say the halacha is like Rava. He says the halacha is it can't be 20 amos. It doesn't matter. He goes like he basically explains it like the Rif, but in a more Masudic language. That's the Rif, and the Rambam and the Shulchan Aruch. That's number 3. Number 4 is what is the halacha according to the Shita of the Rosh? Who are the major contenders? Whenever according to the Beis Yosef. Rabbi Yosef Kar, when he was writing the Shulchan Aruch, he writes, in general, like when I'm learning halacha, he writes that I follow the Rambam, the Rif, and the Rosh. Not always, but generally speaking, he'll if 2 of them paskin one way and one paskin the other way, he'll follow 2 out of the 3. Not always. So let's see what the Rosh says. Now we already know that the Rif and the Rambam say the same thing, which isn't so uncommon. So basically, the Shulchan Aruch could say, I mostly follow the Rif. I mean, I don't know how many times they disagree, the Rambam and the Rif. We have to be ma'ayin on how many times. Maybe it's more than 25 times, but maybe it's more. We'll find out. Yeah.
Make it if you need it higher. Like according to all the rabbis.
Yeah. You're saying they should just say it and like it's better without just saying it's puzzle? Well, it's not better. The Gemara is kind of asking that on Amud Aleph, saying why doesn't it just say lower it, like it says by the Korah, and why does it say puzzle? I don't know if that's your question or not.
It's possible because it's above 20, but you still say that it's better to do the mitzvah with it lower down more because it's consistent with what the rabbis are saying about seeing the stock and the various rabbis who go through their arguments. It all overlaps with the idea that having lower is everything.
Yeah, but they're saying the same thing. They're saying it can't be higher than 20, above 20 amos. So you, Power, that you're a lawyer, you know how to write a legal document. Well, it's self-understood that it's puzzle if it's higher than 20 amos. So it's self-understood. Yeah. I don't know that it's any better if it's 19. It could be 20 amos, as long as it's not 21, over 20. 20 amos is kosher. I don't know if it's any worse than 10 amos, you know? Here's the Rosh. Let's see what the Rosh says. Sorry, turning a lot of pages here. The Rosh says that some say the halacha is like Rava. He quotes the Rif, but we hold like Rava, and he explains why. And then he also says the Raz Halevi passes the like Rava as well, because he's a Basra. He's a later authority. Okay. Then he says he's not really. It's V'lav Rayahi, Kamei Shapir Shri the Kaman. He's not convinced of this thing that we paskin like Rava. But this is typical of the Rosh, even though he rejects one of the rayas to follow the Rava. He says there's still enough existing opinions that follow Rava and other proofs to follow Rava, and therefore we would paskin like Rava ultimately. So what he basically does is he's collecting information of who paskins like what and why, weighing in on whether or not he accepts the rationale, and he paskins like Rava. Now, here's another question. What is it? One of the reasons why we paskin like Rava is Hilchas Kabasra. That's one of the things that he brings down. What does Hilchas Kabasra mean? That we go like a later opinion. In other words, if the Shulchan Aruch says one thing and Moshiach says another thing, who do you hold by? Assuming you're a Talmud of Moshiach, or so you hold by Moshiach, not the Shulchan Aruch. If the Shulchan Aruch said something and the Rambam said something else, who would you hold by? Shulchan Aruch. You go by the later thing. So the question is, but that's not really true, because when a rabbi and the student argue, who do you hold by? The rabbi. So the Mei HaShiloach explained that that's only if the rabbi and the student argued in their lifetime. Then you would hold by the rabbi. But if after the rabbi passed away, then the student said something, only started arguing with him after he passed away, then we would listen to the student. Yeah, because then we say he's not, it's like a next generation already. And then he's allowed to say. Anyway, that weighs into that. That's number 4. And I know we have to have a Meyer now, but I wanted to do the thing about number 5. How does the Chanukah candle fit in? There's a shita of Rav Vosner that says if you live in a Manhattan apartment building, and there's other apartment buildings that can see your window, you could light the menorah, because it's not about how high it is, it's about how high you are off the ground. So in a regular situation, if you live on Central Park West, facing the park, so nobody can see you if you're 50 feet up or 100 feet off the ground. But if you live on Weston Avenue and 441, and there's a building across from 441, so then you look and see if there's a neighbor that waves to you, you can light the menorah there. That's Persiminisa. Yeah. Tosfos number 6 is science. Is whether if you have higher than 20 amos, according to Reb Zera, if it could be kosher if it's wide. You have to keep on widening out depending on the height, or is it something else? Kim lahud l'rabanan. That's about, again, whether Tosfos is exploring whether we need science in halacha or not really. Number 7, Avana bar Ava Amar Rav. Kedei Rosh Ruba v'Shulchana. We're going to wait for that for next week. Number 8, the Tosfos, the reason of Lul Shel Tarnagolim. There's a Gemara that says, Lema de Lokachad. There's an opinion that we don't know, it doesn't conform with any one of the 3 Shitos, and we don't know the reason of why it would be kosher or puzzle, a small sukkah that's very high. And Tosfos comes up with a reason, Lul Shel Tarnagolim. Question is, why does Tosfos have to answer a Gemara's question the Gemara doesn't want to answer? What's the reason? Tosfos likes to answer questions. Number 9, Hilni Hamalka, who was she? Everybody thinks that she was a Syrian queen of a certain region, a kingdom of Assyria, who converted. Rashi says something very strange, I believe in Gemara Shabbos, that she was from Beis Menai. Doesn't make any sense. The Moshiach calls them out and says, like, basically Rashi made a mistake. Because the Gemara here is very clear she was like a convert. Okay, but there's I have a lot on Hilni. I spent all morning researching Hilni. Fascinating figure. But you could Google her yourself. There's a Medrash Rava. You Google her and see what it says. Number 10, Chinuch. We didn't get to it, but the bottom thing is about Chinuch. And there's an amazing Ritva that says when it comes to Chinuch, you can't just do something that's almost like the mitzvah, but a little bit off. Because the kids are going to get it exactly that way. So it's exactly a little off. So you have to make it exactly right. Because it's talking about Hilni Amalka, like that she would do exactly what the rest of Chachamim came, even if it would be Yotze Daraisa, but not the Yotze Darabanan. No, the Gemara says no. She would do exactly what the rabbis say, even when it comes to rabbinic laws, even when it comes to chinuch, because that is the Ritva says the proper way to do chinuch. Anyway, Meyer, we'll go down for Meyer now.